Give me time to realize my crime.
Let's talk about the movie The Wedding Singer. Wedding Singer is a movie that was actually made for someone basically like me. Like Adam Sandler, I'm a child of the 80s, and so therefore I'm very nostalgic about that time period. And so when I'm watching the movie, I get to enjoy all the wonderful 80s references and the including people and places and events and hairstyles, clothing styles, although I think a little bit that's hairstyles especially are a little exaggerated, although I will admit I had the ugly perm. And particularly the music, right? So the whole theme of the movie is about the music, and it's a celebration of the music of the 80s. But sometimes I wonder about The Wedding Singer, and that it's kind of painting the 80s with too broad of a brush. So, there's all these great references to the 80s and things like that, but having grown up in the 80s, I look back and I don't see it as so much of the 80s. For me, when I look back at things of the 80s, I associate things with specific events and very specific time frames. So, for example, when I think of the movie Heaven, or the song Heaven by Bryan Adams, I don't think of the 80s. I think of, oh, that's spring 1986 because it was played at prom. And so those are the kind of connections that I make when I think of the 80s. And, Michael Jackson's Thriller was 1982. Come On Eileen by Dexy's Midnight Runners is 1983. I can very clearly see that my freshman year of high school. Madonna came out with Like a Virgin 1984. These are all different time frames, and they don't wash together. They are all separate parts of my life. And I fear that too much in this movie, that it's all washed together, and that everything in the early 80s counts in that regard. If you look it up online, you can see in the Wikipedia page actually says that the movie is supposedly set in Ridgefield, New Jersey in 1985, in the summer of 1985. And so, like I said, you see some references in the movies that don't seem to me to associate with the summer of 1985, and come with other things. And so it makes me think about what's actually happening. And so, recently I put up a video where this happened to me with Smokey in the movie Smokey and the Bandit, where we know what the story is supposed to be and everything like that, but once you start thinking about it, it doesn't always hold up. And you can watch that video up here in the link, whichever side that comes on. And that's what happens when you just start thinking about these things too much. You just spend way too much time thinking about it. In this video, what we're going to do is we're going to take our time and do some analysis and overthink The Wedding Singer. All right, everyone, let's see what happens when we overthink The Wedding Singer. So like I said, my concern is that it's too broad of a brush, and that all the 80s are not the same. Just because something happened in the 80s doesn't mean it's everything 80s. And so let's see what happens when we go thinking about The Wedding Singer. So The Wedding Singer, just to make sure you remember what it's about, The Wedding Singer is Robbie Hart, played by Adam Sandler. Originally was in some rock band of some sort, but now makes his living as a wedding singer because apparently where he lives, which is apparently is Ridgefield, New Jersey, is what we're told, there's a big business for people who sing at weddings, because not only is he there, there's also Jimmy Moore, played by John Lovitz, who's also a wedding singer and does business in that town. Apparently, Robbie Hart sings all the time at the same venue, and at this venue is a new waitress who shows up. That's Julia Sullivan, played by Drew Barrymore. Julia is the cousin of Holly Sullivan, who is also a waitress at that facility. Robbie's friend Sammy is a limo driver, so he spends his time making money driving limos for weddings in this town. And Julia is engaged to this guy, Glenn Gulia. And so when they get married, her name is going to be Julia Gulia. Glenn works in the bond market on Wall Street, so he works in New York. Ridgefield, New Jersey is very close to New York City, and so that all makes sense in that way. Oh, by the way, Sammy, if you don't recognize him, he's a regular character in many Adam Sandler movies. You may have seen him also in Happy Gilmore. He plays the homeless guy who ends up as Happy's caddy. And he is in 50 First Dates with Adam Sandler and Drew Barrymore as 10 Second Tom.
Hi, I'm Tom.
Some of the usual types of things. Adam Sandler has his friends regularly in his movies. I don't even know who the actress who plays it. It's that guy that's in all the Adam Sandler movies, and I don't know the actors that play those two either. So, but that's the story. One last thing, Robbie is also planning to get married in this movie, but then gets left at the altar by his fiance Linda, and that plays a little bit of part of it. So in the end, he's on the rebound, and he meets Julia, who is engaged to this limeball Glenn, and who we find out later in the movie that he fools around with others. And so therefore the idea is we expect Robbie and Julia to get together, and spoiler alert, they do. Okay. Just to tell you some information about The Wedding Singer, there is a lot of information online about this, and according to the website, which should be a website, intheeighties.com. I really like this resource. It was good. Julie and Glenn were supposed to be married on August 5th, 1985. That is a Monday in 1985. Therefore, the movie should be taking place in the summer of 85 because it's a lead up until their wedding. The movie supposedly take place in Ridgefield, New Jersey, with the very northeast corner of the state, right next to New York City. It's actually north of Long Island even, so it's that far north. And so with that context in mind, we can ask the question, does that make sense within the movie? So let's think about that a little.
You spin me round and round and round. Very nice.
Just a disclaimer about the music. Okay, so I'm going to come back and we're going to talk a lot about the music in the movie. But one of the things that we need to do is we need to make sure that we realize this is supposed to be 1985, and so the movie music in it should all be prior to 1985. And indeed, you pretty much find that it is. I don't think we see too many exceptions. In fact, I don't know of any exceptions. A lot of the songs are things that people sing in the movie. So, for example, the wedding singer Robbie, when the movie starts, he's singing "You Spin Me Round Like a Record," and indeed, that was summer 1985. That is right on the mark, right there. Later on, he sings "Holiday" and "Love Stinks." These are also songs from the 80s, but they're earlier 80s. But he's a wedding singer. He could be singing songs from time ago. We go to weddings and we always listen to songs that were older. And in fact, this movie, the song that he plays, "That's All," is actually a Ricky Nelson tune from 1959. At one point in the movie, Linda sings to Robbie and she sings "Wake Me Up Before You Go Go." That's a 1984 song by Wham. That's just a reference she's making to an older song. That's perfectly fine. Jimmy Moore, played by John Lovitz as a wedding singer, another wedding singer in the movie, sings "Ladies' Night" for his audition.
Yes, it's ladies' night and the feeling's right.
"Ladies' Night" is a 1980 song. Again, it's an older one. One of the things that Robbie does is teaches music lessons, and Rosie is played by Ellen Albertini Dow, and he teaches her to sing, gives her music lessons during the movie. And at the end, she sings "Rapper's Delight," another 1980s hit. Again, that's a flashback or reference to something else. Dave Veltri, Steve Buscemi plays the drunken brother in the initial wedding, turns up as a wedding singer at Robbie and Julia's wedding, and he sings "True" from 1983. And one of my favorite characters in the movie, George's favorite song is "Do You Really Want to Hurt Me" by Culture Club, which is from 1982. So these are all songs that get referenced in the movie, and they're all from before 1985, and that makes sense in that respect. So I'm okay with that.
Relax. Don't do it.
So let's talk about some of the other things that we encounter, though. So we're gonna talk about a few of the things that pop up in here. Julia and Holly are at a wedding reception, and they go back into the kitchen, and the cook back there tells them to relax, don't do it. Frankie says, relax, don't do it, and that's a reference, of course, to the song "Relax" by Frankie Goes to Hollywood, which was released in 1984. Entered the top 100 in April 7th, 1984, and stayed there for about 7 weeks. Now, it was really popular because at the time, there were these t-shirts. Everybody was wearing Frankie Says Relax t-shirts, kind of like what he has here, and they were really popular. But, you know, that was 1984. This is supposed to be 1985. And so the whole question is whether that Frankie Says Relax pop culture reference would necessarily work at that point. And, you know, having lived through that, by 1985, Frankie Says Relax would have been so last year. You know, it was like, that was last year's thing. We're way past. So Frankie Goes to Hollywood was, I mean, they were only on the chart for 7 weeks in 1984. So they were done by summer 1984. Frankie Goes to Hollywood had been already off the charts, and they weren't doing anything else. On the other hand, you know, this cook may not be the most hip guy of all time, and so maybe he is just so last year and really lame. So maybe that's what it is. But yeah, just one of the first instances that we see of something that's not quite 1985 vintage, and it's pre-1985. Oh, by the way, the shirt that he has here, which says "Relax" on it, that's, oh boy, the t-shirts that were coming out that were Frankie Says Relax actually said that Frankie Says Relax, and there's an example of that in the show Friends. Ross has an old Frankie Says Relax t-shirt, and you can see there it is, actually Frankie Says Relax. It doesn't just say relax on it. I was going to say that this is inconsistent with the actual shirts because they all said Frankie Says Relax or Frankie Says Relax, don't do it, and it was always Frankie Says. But I was looking online and everything like that, and there are some examples where the shirt just says relax, and so I won't say that that's actually wrong or anything like that, but it wasn't the common way to do the shirt at that time. But on the other hand, in 1985, you wouldn't be wearing a Frankie Says Relax t-shirt. That would just been so last year. Now, on the other hand, when they're in the kitchen there, then that guy, when he gets done talking, he goes over and turns on the radio, and we hear the song Der Kommissar by After the Fire. Der Kommissar this song was released in 1982 by After the Fire. It's actually originally by Falco, who also had other hits in the 80s, but it was not a popular song from Falco, and I think it was only the German version that he did. Der Kommissar did an English version of it, and it released in 1982. It hit the top 100 in February 1983, stayed there for 21 weeks. This was a big hit and everything like that. But that's 1983. By 1985, that's gone, right? There's nobody listening to Der Kommissar on the radio in 1985. Now, the one thing to remember is that back in 1985, we're talking top 40 radio, right? We didn't have Sirius XM and Spotify and playlists and things like that. You really didn't have that stuff. So you weren't going to turn on the radio and find a song playing from 2 years ago. That just didn't happen back in the 80s. If you had an oldie station, it was going to be back in the 60s. More or less is going to be that type of stuff, 50s or 60s, that type of oldies. You didn't even see a lot of 70s at the time. That wasn't all that big. And you didn't have this mix of, 80s, 90s, yesterday and today and things like that. You didn't have that on radio stations in the 80s. Those were top 40 radio stations that were playing songs that ended up on Casey Kasem, right? That's the kind of thing. So Der Kommissar, great song and all that, but not really going to be something playing in 1985. So it suggests that this is something earlier. If you're going to get that on the radio, that's more of a 1983 thing. All right?
You gonna be all right with that? I mean, you might miss Miami Vice.
Something that is consistent with being in the summer of 1985. So I think they go to an engagement party, and Glenn says that he won't miss Miami Vice because of the wedding, because it's summer reruns. And that makes sense. So Miami Vice debuted in 1984. And it was a pretty big hit. By late 1985, it was huge. I remember that year. That was the year of the Don Johnson suit and the 5 o'clock shadow. Really popular I associate it with more of even to the point of spring '86. This is when it was really, really big. Because '86, this is what guys were wearing at prom. They were wearing the Miami Vice Don Johnson suit with the wicker shoes and the 5 o'clock shadow, going to prom that way. I'm sure it started sooner, so 1985. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Yeah, I can do that. So that's actually perfectly consistent with a 1985 time frame. Not consistent with 1983. Too late for 1983. It's got to be something late 84, early 85, late 85, early 86. And so that kind of puts the time frame on the movie in that way. All right?
I got you something. It's called a CD player.
Later in the movie, Glenn comes over to Julia and Holly's, where Julia stays with Holly, and he brings her a CD player, and she is all amazed that he has a CD player. That's also consistent with 1985. It could be a little bit earlier than 1985, but 1985 would work for that. I found this really great article online from spin.com. It was an article from 1985, May of 1985, talking about CD players and the sound of the future. So this was before The Wedding Singer supposedly taken place. And from there, what we learn is that there are actually, from 1983 to 1984, there are almost 500,000 home CD players that were sold, and with an expected 500,000 more in 1985. So by that point, we're talking about 1 million CD players. They were expensive. The cheaper ones you could get for $200, but up to $1,000 that you were paying, especially in 83, 84, they were really expensive. By 1985, the price had come down, and so you had this price range, but it could be up to $1,000 that it would be. Interestingly, there's 500,000 CD players on the market. There's not very many CDs that you can play. Even in 1985, there are only 5,000 titles that came out. I don't know how many titles had come out before that, but you weren't getting the Beatles' White Album on CD or Abbey Road on CD at that point. They just weren't releasing it. They were still releasing vinyl. So what I conclude out of this is that, probably CD players were rare enough at the time that it wouldn't be too big of a surprise that Julia and Holly wouldn't know much about them. Might not be completely clueless like they were, but they could be, as far as we know. And so this could be something, that some rich guy like Glenn could be bringing them a CD player. Billy Idol knew all about CD players. He knew what that was. And so that's perfectly consistent with it being 1985 as well. So we got a couple things here that are consistent with that 1985 time frame. All right. But then things kind of go off the rails. Glenn's a big fan of Miami Vice, and so they put it in the movie that he's getting out of his DeLorean at the club to pick up Julia, and the Miami Vice theme is playing in the car. And they're like, that's it, because he's a Miami Vice guy. And so, of course, he's got the Miami Vice theme blaring. Does that make sense? Well, the Miami Vice theme by Jan Hammer was released as a single from the Miami Vice soundtrack album. The album itself wasn't released until 1985. When it did, it rocketed to number one. It debuted at number one, I think, almost even. It's hard to find album charts for that time, but yeah, it was number one very soon after it was released. By November, it was already number one in the album charts. I know that. We know that the Miami Vice theme single was released earlier. It debuted on the Billboard Top 100 at number 59 on September 7th. Of 1985. I can't find an exact release date, but given the popularity and everything like that, it could have been too long before this. And so the indications are dicey here. Ravi, Holly, Glenn, and Julia go to the club a week before Glenn and Julia's wedding. And so if the wedding is August 5th, that means that the weekend is the 26th to the 28th of July. But Miami Vice theme single, it doesn't seem like it's going to be released until at least August. He doesn't have a cassette because the album's not out yet, and so he's not playing the cassette in his car, and it shouldn't be on the radio by that point either, because it didn't hit the radio airwaves until later in August. And so how is he listening to Miami Vice theme in his car in July of 1985? Not sure that that's going to be something that's possible. So I don't like that one. And so what that says is that that reference would be later than summer 1985. is what it's suggesting, at least if that's going to be true.
Ugh, no one will ever solve that.
When Glenn comes into the house and brings a CD player, Holly tosses aside a Rubik's Cube and says, no one's ever going to be able to solve that. I had solved a Rubik's Cube by 1982. I was already solving the Rubik's Cube. Granted, I bought the book and cheated, but I knew how to do it. And so when I see that, I said, Rubik's Cube, no, that's 1982 days era, because that's when I was solving the thing. By 1981, Rubik's Cube had become a craze. It was introduced in 1980. By 81, it had become a craze, and estimated in the period from 81 to 80 to 83, 200 million Rubik's Cubes were sold worldwide. By 1982, New York Times reported that sales had fallen and that the craze has died. Rubik's Cube was a big craze, but like so many 80s crazes, it was hot and then fell off the face of the earth. Boom, it was dead. Yeah, you may have gotten a Rubik's Cube back in 1982, like everybody else did, Holly. But by 1983, that thing was stuck back in a shelf somewhere, and you never looked at it again until you had kids. And in the year 2000, when it became very popular again in the 21st century, no one would have it lying around the house and be messing with a Rubik's Cube in 1985. That just wasn't happen. So Rubik's Cube being popular, that's more of a 1982 thing. It's not 1985. At the club, so we're jumping back and forth here, I realize Holly's wearing fingerless gloves, and Robbie tells her she looks like Madonna, and she laughs and says that's what it's supposed to be. My initial thought is that this is dicey, but it's probably okay. Fingerless gloves were very popular in the mid-'80s. I remember it. According to this website, 1980s fashion, fingerless gloves started in 83-ish, but they came the height of popularity in 1984. And 1984, of course, was in conjunction with Madonna's Like a Virgin album, and so that's when it became associated with Madonna. And so reached a height of popularity in 1984. Still going to be popular in 1985. I can tell you my prom date in 1985 actually had them. I remember that much. And so they could last till the end of 1985. Yeah, by then it's going to start dying off and everything like that. But the fact that she would still be wearing them, that's possible. On the other hand, the fact that he would be surprised or say, hey, it looks just like Madonna. No, this is by the end of the fad, and so it's be pretty well known. But I'm still going to call this one. It's okay. It's consistent with late 85, more consistent with early 1985 or late 1984, but I can accept it.
Oh, baby, just you shut your mouth.
And Glenn, I love Glenn's response. Yeah, we all know the words. That's a very Glenn thing to say. To let you know about China Girl. China Girl was released in 1983. It was number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100. It entered the charts in June in 1983 and stayed 18 weeks. So a lot of the over the summer of and early fall of 1983, we heard China Girl. Would it still be in the club 2 years later? Oh, that's a tougher one. I mean, it's not a great dance hit. Even when it was big, it only got to 51 on the dance club chart. So it's not like it was a popular dance club song, even when it was popular. So I'm not so sure that that's one that's gonna necessarily, depends on the DJ, of course. Maybe the DJ liked David Bowie and everything like that, and so it's, it's an older song, not necessarily one that's going to be a big club hit. That's what I would worry about. The next song that they play is Private Idaho by the B-52s, and that's even older. That's back in 1980 and hit number 74. It wasn't a big popular hit on the Hot 100. It only got up to 74. It did make it number 5 in the dance club chart, and so it was a very popular song in the clubs. And so, it's 5 years after it's popular, but it is a big club song. And that's where the B-52s were very popular in the clubs. And so I'll give them that one. David Bowie, I'm not so sure about China Girl on that.
I think he's coming to town in September.
So we could ask the question, has David Bowie come to town in September of 1985? And the answer is no. In fact, David Bowie was not touring in 1985. In fact, he didn't tour in 1984 to 1986. He wasn't touring at all. The only thing he was doing in 1985 was Live Aid concerts. And the last one that he did was July 13th, and that was I don't know where he was actually playing. Was he in Wembley Stadium, or was he in Philadelphia, whatever? I don't know exactly where David Bowie was during Live Aid, but that was the only time he played in all of July was Live Aid. And so he was not planning to come to town in September of 1985. By the way, I got this all off of David Bowie. There's a concert website for David Bowie that has all history of all the concerts David Bowie has ever done, including when he was with Ziggy Stardust and everything like that. Did he ever come to town? Where do you have to decide what we mean by come to town? Well, New Jersey itself is harder to say. Where is he going to come in New Jersey? Remember, he didn't tour from 1984 to 1986. In 83, he actually played in the area. And when I think of New Jersey, I think New York, Philadelphia, but Northeast corner is very much New York City. But in 1983, he played Syracuse, Hershey, Pennsylvania, and Philadelphia, and earlier in the summer in 1983. So there was some times when he was kind of near there, but not really. Now, the real secret is that he did do a concert at Madison Square Garden in September, but it's September 1987. Now, that would be coming to town. When Robbie says that David Bowie's coming to town, he's undoubtedly talking about coming to New York City. And sure enough, he came to New York City on September 1st, 1987, when he was on his Glass Spider tour. So there you go. David Bowie coming to town in September it works as a reference, except it's the wrong year. And so that would indicate that it would be 1987, which doesn't work for the movie. So we're kind of jumping all over again. Okay, so David Bowie playing Madison Square Garden in September, wrong year again.
Say hi to your brother Tito.
At one point in the movie, Sammy and Robbie go to Julie and Glenn's engagement party, and Sammy shows up wearing a red leather jacket and a glove on one hand. It's clearly a Michael Jackson reference, and so he's looking like dressing up like Michael Jackson at that point. Basically, the reference here is going to Michael Jackson's Thriller outfit. So that's where the red leather jacket that Michael Jackson was wearing became popular. This was the outfit from Michael Jackson of the Thriller era. Thriller released in November 1982 and very popular in 1983. Boy, do I remember that one well. Yeah, that winter of 1982-83 with the Thriller album. Absolutely spectacular time for that. Loved all those songs. But again, look at the years on this. 1983, right? It's there. That's Michael Jackson, 1983. By 1985, Michael Jackson is way past Thriller. He's doing things like We Are the World, and he's touring with his brothers unhappily on the Victory Tour. But he started wearing that outfit that's more like this Mater D outfit or Bullfighter's outfit, and that's when he was wearing his hat that looks something like this and hanging out with Liz Taylor and those types of things, way past his Thriller outfit. So that's what he was looking like in 1985. This is vintage Michael Jackson, vintage 1983. This is Michael Jackson, vintage 1985. This is kind of what he was looking like. Yeah, by 1985, you're not wearing the red leather jacket anymore. That's caricature Michael Jackson by that point, right? That's Michael Jackson as a joke in 1985. That's what I say is that's a costume party version of Michael Jackson in 1985. That's not a Michael Jackson style. If you're going to dress like Michael Jackson, you're going to be looking more like this. And in fact, nobody's looking like dressing like Michael Jackson in 1985 because he's not popular during 1985, right? This is not his thing. This really is. Not popular relative to Michael Jackson. It's not Thriller. It's not bad. It's in between that time, and this is the time where he was really actually down and out in a lot of ways. And that's why he was actually touring with his brothers on the Victory Tour, because he needed money. And so, this is a really, really bad. And we talked before about wearing a Frankie Goes to Hollywood t-shirt a year after Frankie Goes to Hollywood is gone. This is long gone at that point. So, and there's no way anybody trying to be cool would ever be doing that by 1985. That's a long way past that. He should be wearing his members only jacket and dressing like Don Johnson, like Glenn does at that engagement party.
I don't know. We're living in a material world, and I am a material girl or boy.
So Material Girl, of course, was Madonna's Like a Virgin album, 1984. And so a little bit earlier than the time frame that we're talking here. But on the other hand, given the lead in, when Julia says, I thought you were all above that material stuff, and Robbie's response is, we're living in a material world, and I'm a material girl. And you know what? I think that's perfectly, even in the 80s, that's a perfectly legitimate response. It's a snarky response, but it's exactly the kind of thing that I would even say right now. So I'm going to give him that one without any problem. So I'm okay with him. I'm a Material Girl reference. It's older, but at the same time, the reference works in that situation as it is.
Hey, do you like Flock of Seagulls?
Obviously, he does. So let's talk a little bit about the Flock of Seagulls. And Flock of Seagulls was a group that was together from about 79 to 86. Their biggest album in the U.S. was their first album, came out in 1982. Songs out of that, the biggest song out of that was Iran. But there's also, if you're aware of them, you know about Space Age Love Song, which is another great song from that album. They had a second album in 1983, which did have a hit, Wishing I Had a Photograph of You. Their third album came out in 1984. Didn't have any singles that actually hit charts in the U.S. By 1986, they were gone, right? They had broken up. They got back together in whatever form in 1988 and started back up again. But 85, 86 was really when the Flock of Seagulls was going out. Yeah, a real diehard Flock of Seagulls fan might still be holding on to this fandom in the summer of 85. It wasn't based on much. I mean, this, and there's a reason why you don't see a lot of it around in the movie and stuff like that. But no, this is there's no albums coming out, and the breakup of the band's right around the corner. Even the diehard Flock of Seagull fans would really be having a hard time holding on at this point. One would think, right? So again, this is just, it's too early for 1985, and so that's just the problem that we see here.
Do you really want to hurt?
And then there's George. Oh, I love George. George is played by Alexis Arquette. So Rosie Arquette and David Arquette, who married Courtney Cox, are siblings there. So George plays a trans woman, and George is obviously a big fan of Boy George. Again, there's a fanatic thing going here, which kind of makes it iffy, but on the whole, this doesn't work for me. Boy George, so George is a big fan of Boy George and has that Boy George look and everything like that. But that Boy George was really popular in, again, 83, 84. Culture Club got big in the U.S. with their album Colored by Numbers in 1983. Songs like Karma Karma Chameleon and Do You Really Want to Hurt Me and things like that. That was their big album. They had other things coming out afterwards, but it wasn't as successful as their first. It just wasn't. I mentioned it here. I remember we had a person at our high school who was a big Boy George fan and dressed it up, did the Boy George dress up thing. And so I know that type of thing went on, but that person graduated in 1984. So by 1984, that was already past. And so, she was dressing up Boy George fall of 83, spring of 84 during their senior year of high school. Wouldn't be doing it by 1985. Again, fashions that just was out by then. It really would have been. I know George was a fanatic, okay? And I actually, admit this, and so George was a big fanatic, sang, that's what George sang was Culture Club songs. But I don't think this holds up. It's another one of those 80s pop culture references that comes in the movie that's before 1985, but just isn't there in 1985. 80s was a time, as I said, it was a time of big popular trends and everything like that. And then we moved on, right? You had a Rubik's Cube for a year, but next year you didn't do a Rubik's Cube anymore. Michael Jackson Thriller was big for a year, not even. And then you moved on. Same thing with Culture Club. You could be a big Boy George fan while Culture Club was famous, but then it just moved on. And there are new famous things going on right after that was done. So just a lot of that in this movie. There's all these things that are referenced early 80s that just don't hold up in 1985. What about Billy Idol?
Don't you talk to Billy Idol that way.
So on the plane to Las Vegas, presumably they're coming out of Newark, LaGuardia, somewhere up there in that part of New York, going to Las Vegas, and Billy Idol is on the plane. So either those airports would work. Nope, I spelled Idol wrong. Yeah, like David Bowie, Billy Idol was not touring in 1985. In fact, I don't know what he did, what he was doing. Didn't look it up close enough to know that. Who knows where he would have been? It's perfectly reasonable that Billy Idol could have been sitting on a plane from Newark to Las Vegas. So yeah, that's a possibility. So those are some of the things that I've noted throughout this movie. I mentioned before the website inthe80s.com, which I really liked and had a lot of great information about this. There's a few other concerns about the movie that they pointed out that I didn't bring up myself, and I do agree with them. The question of, for example, JR being shot. Come on, JR. God, I was in the roller rink and doing roller skating at the time JR was shot. That was 1985, gang. It's like it says, this is 1980. The shooting took place in the spring of 1980, and there's no way that refers to 1985. It's just a random 80s reference that they throw in there. Photographer mentions all these different couples that she thinks are going to last forever. Yvonne and Donald, that's even funnier nowadays. Woody and Mia, Bert and Lonnie. And the website here talks about a few other things. But the dumb thing is there were actual 1985 references that could have been made. So 1985 was when Billy Joel married Christy Brinkley, for Pete's sake. They got married March 23rd, 1985. I saw Billy Joel play 1993, I think. And they were still married in 1993, but breakup was imminent and everybody knew it was coming by that point. And in fact, just a couple weeks later, it was going to be Madonna and Sean Penn were getting married. And that didn't last long at all. So if you wanted actual real good references to make for couples that you just know are going to work together, Madonna and Sean Penn, Billy Joel and Christy Brinkley, those would have been great references to make. Not Woody and Mia. God, Bert and Lonnie. Yeah, maybe. I don't think so. Doesn't work there. Van Halen had already announced their breakup long before the wedding. That was because Sammy Hagar was already replacing David Lee Roth in the band. I don't know about the Blue Monday 88 remix, and so I'm not even going to worry about that. But that's a lot of some other issues that showed up that was pointed out in there. So just like they could have actually had some legitimate couples to refer to that based on 1985 if they had done a little bit of homework on this. In terms of the songs, it's a little harder just because I realized that these songs that you see here that were actually popular at the time are not those glitchy 80s songs that you think of. It's not Passaducci by Sonic Youth and stuff like that. I mean, You Spin Me Round by Dead or Alive, that was actually a top 20 song in summer of 1985. This is a top 20 from, I think, last week of July or something like that. Duran Duran, Get It On by Power Station. Bruce Springsteen, Heaven, I had actually referenced in the introduction, talk about that. This is fall of 85, summer of 85. I associate it with spring of 86. We're pretty close in that. Sting, Not David Bowie. Some of these things, Cyndi Lauper, and Hilda Barge singing "Who's Holding Donna Now" and stuff like that. Prince and the Revolution, Raspberry Beret would have been a really cool song to include in the movie, and that would have been actually a little more. When he turns on the radio, why couldn't it have been one of these, right? Why couldn't it be Raspberry Beret? Aside from music rights and having to pay for it and stuff like that. But that would have worked a lot better than turning on Der Kommissar, right? I really would have liked to have something like that. Could they actually reference some fads of 1985's? 1985. Actually, one of the things that said, and here's a Hobby Lark 1985 fun facts, it says fashion trends included fingerless gloves, and so they got that part right. Let me think. Members only jackets? Yeah, they definitely show up wearing members only jackets at that point. Oversized tops. Yeah, Holly had actually some of that stuff going on. Shoulder pads. Shoulder pads I associate a little bit later. We're a little bit later on when the shoulder pads really came around. Instead of a Rubik's Cube, you're talking Care Bears and Teddy Ruxpin.
Hi there. My name is Teddy Ruxpin.
Boy, as bad as that gets. And Super Mario would be the video game in there. The one that really could have got in here, which I thought really should have, and upon looking upon it, with a little bit of work, 1985 was when actually Coke pulled out New Coke in June and then abandoned it by July. Boy, some reference to New Coke or something like that would have worked so much better in this movie than some of the things that they did. So, just a thought. All right, so after thinking about the movie The Wedding Singer, maybe overthinking the movie The Wedding Singer, I'm left with the conclusion that, I'm not sure it works. This claim of a summer 1985 time frame, there are things there that are consistent with that, but there's just a lot that doesn't fit at that time. Like I said from the beginning, the 80s were not just the 80s. There were specific times, specific things. Fads came and went, and you can't just say everything that happened back in the early 80s was all at the same time. And the best example was from the In the 80s website, where they pointed out that Shooting JR was nothing to do with 1985. Dallas was off the air by then. Gang, come on, that's not even close. So if you start thinking about it and you really think about it and you overthink it, Wedding Singer can't be going on in 1985. If you look at it, actually, there's a lot more stuff that's consistent with a late 83, early 84 time frame. I think you could fit a lot more into it. There are certain things you can't fit into it. I don't think, the Miami Vice reference especially doesn't fit into that 84, summer 84, because Miami Vice didn't come on, so it had to be after that. But those other things are all so late, are also much earlier on than 1985, that it just kind of all spreads that out. And so what I see here is that Adam Sandler and the writers of the movie just tried to jam as many 80s pop culture references in as they could, without any real thought about whether it actually fit into a coherent story. So that's my conclusion after thinking about The Wedding Singer. And in the end, that doesn't work for me as an 80s child of the 80s. It doesn't work for me in that way. Now, that doesn't mean I don't like The Wedding Singer as a movie. I mean, I think that the chemistry between Adam Sandler and Drew Barrymore is outstanding. George is such a great character in that movie. I just love that part. And Sammy's really cool, and these references about not wanting to be Fonzie and Vinnie Barbarino, and he said, Fonzie's into directing, which I think was true by 1985, and John Travolta had the Bull movie or whatever. That was way back in 1980. I mean, this is really, really way past the time. So that's a lot of what you're seeing in that respect, and so that's what I would have to say. I still one of my watchable movies that I do watch when I see it on, and for nothing else, because of the music. I really do like the music, and because I am a child of the 80s, and I do listen to my 80s music. Speaking of that, hey, if you're a fan of 80s music, take a look or be sure to check out the ongoing project that I'm working on with YouTube music playlists. I'm doing playlists on all the songs that made the top 40s in the 80s. So far I've done 1980 is available. I'm working on 1981, and this is a long ongoing project, so don't expect anything to be finished soon. But check that out on YouTube Music. You can find that all the top 40 songs from the 1980s playlist that I'm working on at this point. And so if you want to get your 80s fix of the top 80 songs, that is the place to go for it. You'll recognize a lot of things in there. You'll find a lot of things that you didn't recognize and a lot of things you didn't remember that you recognized. So do that as it is. Hey, if you like this video and want to see more content like this and want to see me overthink other movies, if you haven't checked out the Smokey and the Bandit video, please be sure to do that. And this is my Wedding Singer video. Put a message in the comments and tell me what movie you want me to overthink and what I should be overthinking it about. I can't just overthink everything, you know. You can tell me to overthink 16 Candles, but there's not a lot to overthink there. I think there's a lot of things that are pretty clearly wrong in this regard, so I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. But you tell me which ones you want me to overthink, and I'll think about it and see what I can come up with. Otherwise, hit the like button to let me know that you like this type of content. I'm not going to be a subscribe person because subscribe or not, I don't know. But that's kind of things that you want me to do. So, hey, thanks for watching the video, and I hope you enjoyed it.